My name is Harper Bennett, and am 28 years old. I'm standing in my parents' living room in Connecticut, watching my younger sister Sloane squeal with joy as our father hands her a check for $100,000. The crystal chandelier above casts dancing shadows across the scene, and my hands tremble as I grip my cold coffee mug. 2 weeks ago, I sat at this same table begging for a $5,000 loan to cover rent after losing my job. My father looked me dead in the eye and said I needed to learn financial responsibility. Now he's funding Sloane's Monaco vacation, and my mother just said those exact words that keep echoing in my mind. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Hit that like button if this resonates with you, and subscribe, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the people who count you out give you the greatest motivation to prove them wrong. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare began. My father cleared his throat and smiled at Sloane with a warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He explained that Sloane deserved to see the world because she was young and vibrant, still full of dreams and possibilities. My mother chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with admiration as she talked about how Sloane had always been so creative and free-spirited, how she needed experiences to fuel her artistic soul. Sloane, who just turned 25 last month, literally jumped up and down like a child on Christmas morning, already pulling out her phone to research yacht parties and casino nights in Monte Carlo. I tried to speak, tried to point out the absolute insanity of what was happening, but every time I opened my mouth, one of them interrupted me with another detail about Sloane's upcoming adventure. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 weeks earlier, I had sat at this exact dining table, my hands shaking as I explained my situation. I had lost my marketing coordinator position when the company downsized unexpectedly. I had been a good employee, had stellar reviews, but I was part of the last hired group, which made me first to go when budget cuts came down. I needed $5,000 to cover rent and groceries while I job hunted, just enough to keep me afloat for 2 months while I found something new. My father's response had been ice cold. He leaned back in his chair and said I was almost 30 years old, that they couldn't keep bailing me out every time I made poor decisions. My mother had nodded along, adding that I needed to stand on my own feet, that they had managed at my age without help from their parents. I remember trying to explain that I had never asked them for money before in my entire adult life, that this was the first time I genuinely needed help, but they dismissed my words like I was making excuses. They told me it was about principles, about teaching me responsibility. I left that house humiliated. And for the past 2 weeks, I had been surviving on ramen noodles and watching my credit card debt climb higher every single day. Now, standing in that same living room, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I pointed out the screaming unfairness of the situation, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Sloane had never worked a full year in her entire life. She had dropped out of college twice, changed her major 4 times before giving up entirely, and had attempted 5 different careers, none of which lasted more than a few months. My parents immediately jumped to her defense. My mother said Sloane was still finding herself, that she was exploring her options and discovering her passion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I started listing Sloane's job history out loud. There was the boutique where she lasted 2 months before deciding retail was beneath her. The yoga studio where she quit after 6 weeks because she didn't like waking up early. The art gallery internship she abandoned after 3 weeks because the owner didn't appreciate her vision. The social media management gig she walked away from after 2 months because her manager had what she called bad energy. Her most recent job at a high-end clothing store had ended just 3 months ago when she decided the commute was too stressful. Through all of this, my parents had paid her rent, her car payment, her credit cards, her gym membership, and apparently now her 6-figure vacation. My mother's face twisted with anger, and she snapped that my jealousy was unbecoming, that it made me look small and petty. My father joined in, his voice filled with disappointment, as he said this was exactly why they couldn't help me, that I had a victim mentality and always blamed others for my problems. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was asking for $5,000 to survive while they handed my sister $100,000 for a party trip, and somehow I was the problem. Sloane looked up from her phone where she had been scrolling through Monaco hotels and smirked at me. She suggested I try yoga or meditation for all the negativity I was carrying around. The casual cruelty in her voice, the amusement in her eyes, made something crack inside me. I realized in that moment that I was completely alone in this family, that no amount of hard work or responsibility or playing by the rules would ever make them see me the way they saw her. 1 week after the Monaco announcement, I was sitting in my apartment staring at my phone when the family group chat lit up. Sloane had posted a photo of a fancy steakhouse with the caption celebrating her upcoming adventure with Mom and Dad. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing out a simple question asking if I was invited to this family dinner. The three dots appeared and disappeared several times before my mother finally responded. She said, "Oh, she supposed I could come if I really wanted to, but they weren't paying for my meal." The message felt like a slap, but I was so desperate to be included, to maybe repair whatever was broken between us, that I showed up anyway wearing the one nice dress I owned that didn't need dry cleaning. The restaurant was the kind of place where appetizers cost $30 and the wine list was longer than the food menu. I arrived exactly on time to find my family already seated, already halfway through a bottle of wine that cost more than my electric bill. I slid into the empty chair and picked up the menu with growing dread. Everything was expensive, absurdly so, and I knew my checking account had maybe $80 in it until payday. When the waiter came around, Sloane ordered the lobster tail with champagne and made a big show of adding the chocolate lava cake for dessert. My parents ordered steaks that cost $60 each. When the waiter turned to me, I quietly asked for the house salad as an entree, no protein, dressing on the side. My mother raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Sloane giggled into her champagne glass. Halfway through the meal, Sloane made her big announcement. She was quitting her current job at the boutique immediately to focus on preparing for Monaco. She needed time to shop for the right wardrobe, to research the best clubs and restaurants, to get herself mentally and physically ready for the experience of a lifetime. My parents actually applauded. My father called it brave, said it took courage to prioritize experiences over a paycheck. My mother beamed with pride and said Sloane was living life the right way, seizing opportunities instead of being a slave to corporate America. I saw my opening and mentioned that I had a second-round interview scheduled for the following week at a promising tech startup. The words barely left my mouth before my father nodded absently and turned his attention back to Sloane's Monaco plans. He didn't ask about the position, the company, or the salary. My mother didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. Then Sloane looked directly at me, her eyes sharp with something mean, and said maybe if I were more interesting, I would get better opportunities in life. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather, but the words landed like poison. My mother actually laughed, a genuine amused sound, and agreed that Sloane had a point. She said I had always been so plain, so predictable, so safe in all my choices. Other diners at nearby tables were starting to glance over, sensing the tension. My face burned with shame, and I focused on my salad, forcing myself to chew and swallow even though everything tasted like cardboard. I wanted to get up and leave, but I had no money for a cab, and my car was parked at my apartment because I couldn't afford the restaurant's parking fees. When the bill finally arrived, my father pulled out his credit card and paid for everyone's meal except mine. The waiter brought me a separate check for $18, which included my sad little salad and a glass of water. I pulled out my debit card knowing exactly what was about to happen, but I had no choice. I handed it to the waiter with shaking hands, and he disappeared for what felt like an eternity. When he returned, his face was apologetic as he quietly told me the card had been declined. The humiliation was suffocating. My parents watched with detached interest, making no move to help. Sloane pulled out her phone and started recording, holding it low but pointed right at me. I had to excuse myself, walk outside the restaurant, and call my friend Becca to beg her to wire me $25 through a payment app. She did it immediately without questions, bless her. But the 15 minutes I spent standing outside that restaurant waiting for the transfer to process were some of the longest of my life. When I finally paid and walked back through the dining room, Sloane was still filming. The next day, she posted a video on social media with laughing emojis about people who go to restaurants they can't afford. My parents never said a word to stop her. 2 days after the restaurant nightmare, I sat in a modern office overlooking the Hartford skyline, trying to calm my nerves for what felt like the most important interview of my life. The position was marketing strategist at a growing tech startup, and the salary was $75,000, which wasn't spectacular for Connecticut but felt like a fortune compared to my current situation of zero income. The woman across from me was Tori Walsh, the company's chief marketing officer, and she was 42 years old with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through every practiced answer I gave. She was a former corporate executive who had built her reputation on brutal honesty and fierce loyalty to people who earned her respect. When she asked about my current laptop, which I had brought to show some portfolio work, I fumbled for an explanation about why it was 6 years old and held together with determination and a single piece of duct tape. She stopped me mid-sentence and said the company would provide all new equipment on day one. Then she offered me the job, right there, no third interview needed. She said she recognized hunger when she saw it. My first day at work was overwhelming in the best way possible. I had a new laptop, a new phone, access to software I had only dreamed about using, and a desk in an office with actual windows. I was determined to prove I deserved this chance, to show up early and stay late and be absolutely perfect. But by lunchtime, the stress of the past month caught up with me all at once. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and started crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I was trying to muffle the sounds when I heard the bathroom door open. I froze, mortified, but the footsteps stopped right outside my stall. Tori's voice came through the door, calm and matter-of-fact, asking if I was all right. I couldn't even formulate a lie. She waited in silence for a minute, then said she would be washing her hands at the sink whenever I was ready to come out. When I finally emerged, eyes red and face blotchy, Tori handed me a paper towel without commenting on my appearance. She told me her story, right there in that office bathroom. She grew up poor, in a family that treated her like she was worthless, while her brother got everything he wanted. She put herself through community college and then state school, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night. Her family mocked her ambitions, called her uppity, said she was trying to be better than them. When she finally made it, when she climbed into executive positions and started earning real money, they showed up demanding handouts and acting like she owed them. She cut them off completely 15 years ago and never looked back. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "The best revenge is success they can't deny." Then she offered me something beyond just employment. She offered mentorship, guidance, someone in my corner who actually wanted to see me win. I felt seen for the first time in months, maybe years. Before I left the bathroom, she warned me that family who treat you like garbage will try to sabotage your success because your winning proves they were wrong about you all along. I should have listened more carefully to that warning. The following Sunday, I went to brunch at my parents' house, still naive enough to think I could rebuild some kind of relationship with them. I was excited about my new job, proud of myself, hoping that maybe this achievement would make them see me differently. My mother had made her famous French toast, and the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. I told them about the job, about Tori, about the opportunities ahead. Sloane seemed unusually interested, asking detailed questions about the company name, the office location, my boss' full name, what exactly I would be doing. I answered everything, relieved that she was finally showing interest in my life. I even told her about the major project I would be working on in a few months, a campaign that could really put me on the map professionally. She nodded along, smiling, asking follow-up questions. I thought maybe we were having a breakthrough, a real conversation between sisters. I was so incredibly wrong. 3 days later, Tori called me into her office with an expression I couldn't read. She closed the door and asked me to sit down. Then she told me that someone had called the company that morning pretending to be from my previous employer. This person had provided detailed information, claiming I had been fired for theft, that I had stolen client information and tried to sell it to competitors, that I was currently under investigation, and they felt obligated to warn my new employer. The story was elaborate, specific, and completely false. Tori's assistant had thought to verify the caller ID before anyone panicked, and the number traced directly back to Sloane's cell phone. My sister had called my new employer and tried to get me fired with a made-up criminal accusation before I had even finished my first week of work. Tori assured me that she had already confirmed the story was fabricated, that my job was secure, but her expression was serious as she repeated what she had told me in the bathroom. "This is what I warned you about. Your family will not let you succeed without a fight." She told me not to confront Sloane yet, to document everything, to be patient. She said my time would come, but I needed to be smart and strategic instead of emotional. I left her office shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak, finally understanding that my own sister genuinely wanted to destroy me. 3 months into my new job, I was finally starting to feel stable. I was good at the work, my colleagues respected me, and I had managed to save almost $3,000, which felt like a fortune after months of having nothing. I was beginning to believe that maybe I could actually build a life separate from my toxic family, that maybe distance and success were the answer. Then my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as Bernard Mitchell, my father's accountant for the past 20 years. He said he was retiring at the end of the month and was calling clients' family members to say goodbye and wish them well. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He hoped I was doing well with my trust fund, that it must have been a comfort to have that cushion when I was going through my recent job difficulties. I asked him to repeat himself, certain I had misheard. He seemed confused, asking if I had received the $50,000 from my grandmother's estate. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out painfully before he spoke again, his voice filled with dawning horror. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away 5 years ago when I was 23. In her will, she had left me $50,000 with instructions that I was to receive it when I turned 25. Bernard had processed the paperwork himself, had transferred the money to my parents to hold in trust for me until I reached the specified age. He had assumed, all this time, that I had received it 3 years ago as planned. He realized in that moment that I knew nothing about it, and he apologized profusely before telling me I needed to speak to my parents directly. He couldn't say more without violating confidentiality agreements, but the guilt in his voice told me everything I needed to know. I drove to my parents' house immediately, not bothering to call ahead, not caring if they were home or busy or entertaining guests. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, and I ran 2 red lights without even noticing. I burst through their front door without knocking and found them in the living room watching television. I demanded to know about the trust fund, about my inheritance, about the $50,000 that was supposed to be mine 3 years ago. For a moment, they both just stared at me like I had lost my mind. Then something shifted in their expressions, a kind of resignation, like they had been caught in a lie they were too tired to maintain. My mother spoke first, saying they didn't think I was mature enough to handle that kind of money at 25. My father added that they had invested it for me, trying to grow it, trying to be responsible stewards of my inheritance. I asked where the money was now, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. I asked to see the account statements, the investment records, any proof that my $50,000 still existed somewhere. My father exchanged a glance with my mother, and in that look, I saw the truth before he even opened his mouth. He admitted they had lent the money to Sloane for her various business ventures over the past 3 years. The boutique she had tried to open that failed within 6 months, the handmade jewelry line that never sold a single piece, the lifestyle blog that required expensive equipment and professional photos but generated zero income. My inheritance, the money my grandmother had specifically left for me, had been poured into my sister's endless parade of failed dreams. I asked when I could expect to be paid back. My mother's response was that family helps family, that they had made the decision they thought was best, that the money had gone to support someone they loved. I pointed out that I was also someone they supposedly loved, that it was my money, legally mine, and they had stolen it. My father actually had the audacity to look offended. He said they hadn't stolen anything. They had made a family decision to invest in Sloane's potential. The money was gone, spent, never coming back, and they felt no remorse whatsoever. I barely made it to my car before I fell apart completely. I sat in the driveway of my parents' house, sobbing so hard I couldn't catch my breath, my chest aching like something inside me had physically broken. $50,000. That money would have changed everything when I was unemployed. I could have paid rent for a year. I could have avoided credit card debt. I could have taken time to find the right job instead of panicking about survival. I could have had security, breathing room, a chance to build something stable. Instead, my parents had stolen it, given it to my sister who pissed it away on ventures she abandoned the moment they became difficult, and they felt completely justified in their choice. I called Tori, barely able to speak through my tears. She asked where I was and told me to stay put. 20 minutes later, she pulled up beside my car and got in my passenger seat. I told her everything, the words tumbling out between sobs. When I finished, I looked at her and said, maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was worthless. Maybe I deserved all of this somehow. It was my lowest moment, the point where I genuinely considered giving up on everything, maybe moving across the country and starting over, where no one knew me or my history. Tori reached over and slapped me, not hard, but enough to shock me out of my spiral. She said that was exactly what they wanted, for me to break, to give up, to prove them right. Then she told me I was going to fight, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved better than what they had given me. She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to me. It belonged to her lawyer friend, Graham Pierce, who specialized in estate disputes and had won cases against family members who stole inheritances. She said I had a legal case, a strong one, and it was time to stop playing defense. I sat there holding that business card, something shifting inside me. The despair started hardening into determination. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. While I was still processing the theft of my inheritance and trying to decide whether to actually pursue legal action, Sloane launched a new assault that proved just how far she was willing to go to hurt me. I woke up one morning to dozens of notifications on my phone, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former high school classmates, distant relatives, even a few professional contacts. My stomach dropped as I opened social media and saw what she had done. Sloane had posted a long, detailed message on Facebook and Instagram, claiming that some people were so consumed by jealousy that they accused family members of theft and tried to destroy their own parents' reputations. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't have to. She posted old photos from high school where I looked awkward and unflattering, tagged extended family members, and shared the posts in local community groups. The comments section filled up with people calling me disgusting, ungrateful, mentally unstable. My aunt commented that she always knew there was something wrong with me. My uncle shared the post, saying family betrayal was the worst kind of evil. 2 cousins I had been close to growing up sent me private messages telling me I should be ashamed of myself. The smear campaign spread faster than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, it felt like everyone in my parents' social circle had seen Sloane's version of events where she painted herself and my parents as innocent victims of my baseless accusations. My mother and father both liked and shared her posts, adding their own comments about how painful it was to have a child who turned against them. I lost 2 friendships that week, people who had known me for years but believed Sloane's narrative without even asking for my side of the story. Worse, some of the posts made their way into my professional network. A former colleague from my old job commented on one of the shared posts, and suddenly people I needed for professional references were seeing this twisted version of me as some kind of unstable family destroyer. I spent an entire evening reporting the posts, trying to get them taken down, but Sloane had been careful not to use my full name, so the platforms ruled that she wasn't violating any policies. She was destroying my reputation in public, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. 2 weeks after the social media attack, I got a call from my landlord that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Chen was normally a kind woman who had never given me problems about late rent or minor issues, but her voice was stiff and formal when she told me she had received an anonymous complaint about my apartment. Someone had reported that I was running an illegal business from the unit, disturbing other tenants with constant traffic and causing property damage. None of it was true. I worked a normal office job, kept to myself, and treated the apartment better than most tenants probably did. Mrs. Chen said she was legally required to investigate complaints, so she would need to conduct an inspection. I agreed immediately, having nothing to hide, and we scheduled it for the following afternoon. She walked through every room, checked every corner, and found absolutely nothing wrong. She apologized for the inconvenience and admitted that someone clearly wanted to cause problems for me. Before she left, she mentioned that the complaint had come through an email that seemed suspicious, and she forwarded it to me. I spent that evening tracing the email address through every method I could find online. Sloane had used a secondary email account she probably thought was untraceable, but she had made the amateur mistake of using it to comment on a few public posts under her real name months earlier. I had proof that my own sister had tried to get me evicted, tried to make me homeless while I was already struggling. This was attack number 4, and it was an attempt to destroy the one stable thing I had left, my housing. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the evidence, understanding with complete clarity that Sloane would not stop until she had ruined my life entirely. She wasn't just being mean or jealous anymore. She was actively trying to destroy every foundation I was trying to build. I forwarded everything to Graham Pierce, the lawyer Tori had recommended, and asked if we could meet as soon as possible. The meeting happened 3 days later in Graham's office downtown. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with careful eyes and a reputation for winning difficult cases. Tori came with me for moral support. Graham spread out everything I had brought: the documentation of the stolen inheritance, the social media screenshots, the email evidence of the eviction attempt, the phone records from the job sabotage. He studied it all for nearly an hour while Tori and I drank terrible office coffee and waited. Finally, he looked up and told me I had a legitimate legal case for the inheritance. I could sue my parents for the $50,000 plus interest and probably win. The problem was that estate litigation was expensive and slow, sometimes taking years to resolve. Before I could feel defeated by that news, Tori leaned forward and said we could do something smarter. She had been thinking about this since our bathroom conversation months ago. Instead of just fighting for the money, we would build a case so undeniable, a success so obvious, that my family's neglect would become impossible to defend or ignore. Tori told me about a major project coming up at work, a comprehensive rebranding campaign for a potential client worth $500,000 to the company. If I could land this project and execute it successfully, I would be looking at a promotion and a salary over 6 figures. That kind of professional success, combined with the legal documentation Graham was building, would put me in a position of real power. Graham added that he would continue quietly documenting every attack for a potential restraining order if things escalated further. We were building a case, not just in court, but in life. I would show my family exactly what they had lost when they chose to destroy me instead of support me. The goal wasn't just to get my money back anymore. The goal was to succeed so completely that their cruelty toward me became the defining shame of their lives. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. We had a plan, and I was going to execute it perfectly. My cousin Jade had always existed on the periphery of the family drama, never quite taking sides, occasionally sending me sympathetic texts when things got particularly bad. She was 31, worked as a nurse, and had always seemed more grounded than the rest of my relatives. So when she reached out 2 months into my legal preparation, saying she couldn't believe what my parents and Sloane were doing to me, I felt a flood of relief. Finally, someone in the family could see how wrong this all was. We met for coffee at a place halfway between our apartments, and she listened to my story with what seemed like genuine sympathy. She called my parents' behavior inexcusable, said Sloane had always been spoiled, but this was beyond normal sibling rivalry. Over the next 3 weeks, we met 2 more times. I told her about the lawyer, about the big project at work that could change everything for me, about my plans to build a life completely separate from the family that had rejected me. Jade seemed supportive, encouraging, even offering to talk to my parents on my behalf to try to make them see reason. I was so desperate for family support, so tired of being completely alone in this fight, that I believed her. I shared details I should have kept private, information about my legal strategy and work deadlines. She asked thoughtful questions, took notes in her phone to remember important dates, and promised to help however she could. I actually started to hope that maybe one person in my family had a conscience, that maybe Jade could be the bridge that helped repair at least some of these relationships. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was, but loneliness makes you vulnerable in ways you don't realize until it's too late. The Sunday before my big presentation at work, the project I had been preparing for 6 solid weeks, I was scrolling through Instagram while eating dinner and saw something that made me drop my fork. Jade had posted a photo from an expensive restaurant, the kind of place you go for special occasions. She was sitting at a table with my mother, my father, and Sloane. The caption said something about family being everything and treasuring time with the people who matter most. I stared at that photo for a full minute, my brain refusing to process what it meant. Then Sloane posted her own photo from the same dinner, and her caption was much more direct. She thanked Jade for being a real family member who understood loyalty and knew how to handle people who tried to tear families apart. My hands started shaking as the reality crashed over me. Jade had been playing me the entire time, gathering information, pretending to be my ally while reporting everything back to my parents and sister. I called Jade immediately, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear the restaurant noise in the background. I asked her point blank if she had just had dinner with my parents and Sloane. There was a pause, and then she sighed like I was being tedious. She said yes, she had dinner with family, which was a normal thing to do. I asked why she had lied to me, why she had pretended to support me while gathering information to give to them. Her response was cold and matter-of-fact. She told me I had brought all of this on myself by being bitter and jealous, that my parents were good people who had worked hard their whole lives, and she wasn't going to stand by while I tried to destroy them with ridiculous lawsuits. Then she added something that revealed her real motivation. She said she needed to maintain good relationships with my aunt and uncle, her parents, who were very close to my parents. More importantly, she wanted to be remembered in my parents' will, and that wasn't going to happen if she sided with me against them. It was all calculated, all about money and inheritance, and I had walked right into her trap. She ended the call by telling me to stop being so bitter and to grow up. That was betrayal number 2, and it hurt almost as much as my parents' theft. The day of my big presentation arrived, and I should have known something was wrong when my computer acted strangely that morning. I had prepared a comprehensive marketing strategy for a luxury hotel chain, complete with social media campaigns, influencer partnerships, and projected ROI that would make them millions in increased bookings. This was the biggest potential client my company had ever pursued. A $500,000 contract that would establish us as serious players in the industry. I had spent 6 weeks on this presentation, refining every slide, memorizing every statistic, preparing for every possible question. When I arrived at the office 2 hours early to do a final run-through, I opened my presentation file and found corrupted data. Entire sections were gone, replaced with gibberish code. My carefully crafted slides were scrambled, images were missing, and the financial projections that had taken weeks to compile had vanished completely. I felt panic rising in my throat as I frantically searched for my backup files. I had been meticulous about backing everything up, saving copies in 3 different locations, but every single backup was also corrupted, damaged in exactly the same way. This wasn't a random computer failure. This was deliberate sabotage. I called our IT department, and they sent someone up immediately. Mark, our head of IT, spent an hour tracing the problem and discovered that someone had accessed my work computer remotely 2 nights earlier, systematically destroying files related to this specific project. He traced the breach to an external source, an IP address that belonged to a freelance IT consultant who occasionally did work for local businesses. More digging revealed that this consultant was currently dating someone, and that someone was Sloane's boyfriend of 3 months. My sister had literally hired a professional to hack into my work computer and destroy the most important project of my career. I had to postpone the presentation, standing in front of my boss and the assembled team looking completely incompetent, explaining that technical difficulties required us to reschedule. The hotel executives were understanding but clearly unimpressed, and I could see my credibility crumbling in real time. After the meeting that wasn't, I made it back to my office before I completely collapsed. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't type, my vision was blurring, and I couldn't catch my breath. Everything felt impossible. My family was united against me, using professional sabotage, recruiting spies, destroying every opportunity I tried to build. The legal case was going to be expensive and lengthy. The court of public opinion had already turned against me thanks to Sloane's smear campaign. Now my career was damaged, my professional reputation was in question, and I had no idea how to fight back against people who had more resources and absolutely no moral boundaries. I pulled up a blank document and started typing a resignation letter. I would quit this job, move across the country, change my name, start completely over where no one knew me or my toxic family. I was typing the second paragraph when Tori walked in without knocking. She took one look at me, closed the door behind her, and asked what I was doing. I told her I was done, that I couldn't fight anymore, that they were everywhere, and they had taken everything from me. She walked over to my desk, turned my monitor so she could read what I was typing, and then she did something I never expected. She grabbed my mouse and deleted the entire resignation letter. Then she told me that if I quit, they won. Everything they had done to me, every attack and betrayal and sabotage, would be validated. They would have successfully destroyed me, and I would spend the rest of my life knowing I let them win. She said she didn't mentor quitters, and she sure as hell didn't mentor people who gave their power away to abusers. Then she told me something that changed everything. She had anticipated something like this might happen, so she had instructed me weeks ago to back up all my important files to a secure cloud service she managed personally. My presentation was safe, every slide and statistic intact, stored where no hacker could touch it. The presentation was rescheduled for the following week, and I had 7 days to prepare even better than before. Tori wasn't finished. She called Graham on speakerphone right there in my office, and he told me that they had now documented attack number 5, complete with proof of the hacking and the connection to Sloane's boyfriend. This was criminal activity, computer crimes that carried actual jail time. We now had enough evidence to file criminal charges if I chose to go that route. Graham said my sister and her boyfriend had just made the biggest mistake of their lives by leaving a digital trail. Everything was documented, everything was provable, and the case we were building was becoming unassailable. I sat there listening to them, these two people who barely knew me 6 months ago, but were fighting harder for me than my own family ever had, and something fundamental shifted inside me. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stand my ground and fight back with everything I had, and I was going to win. 1 week later, I walked into the conference room for my rescheduled presentation with a calm I hadn't felt in months. I had spent the past 7 days rehearsing until I could deliver the entire pitch in my sleep, anticipating every possible question, refining every slide until it was perfect. The hotel chain executives were there, including the CEO, Roland Hayes, who was 55 years old and had built his empire from a single hotel inherited from his grandfather into a luxury brand with properties in 15 countries. My company's leadership filled the other side of the table, including Tori, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod as I set up my laptop. I connected to the projector, pulled up my presentation from Tori's secure cloud, and began speaking with a confidence that surprised even me. I walked them through a comprehensive social media strategy that would position their hotels as aspirational lifestyle brands, targeting affluent travelers through influencer partnerships and user-generated content campaigns. I showed them projected engagement rates, estimated ROI, and a timeline for implementation that would have them seeing results within 3 months. I had researched their competitors, identified gaps in their current marketing, and created solutions that were innovative but achievable. The presentation lasted 45 minutes, and I didn't stumble once. When I finished, Roland Hayes leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he asked me 3 questions that went straight to the heart of the strategy, testing whether I actually understood what I was proposing or if I had just put together a pretty slideshow. I answered each question without hesitation, providing additional data I had prepared specifically for this kind of deep dive. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and said he was impressed. He turned to his team and asked if they had any objections to moving forward. They all shook their heads. Right there in that conference room, Roland Hayes signed the contract for a $500,000 marketing campaign, the biggest deal my company had ever landed. My commission on the project would be $50,000, the exact amount of my stolen inheritance. Tori announced on the spot that I was being promoted to senior marketing strategist with a new salary of $105,000. I had gone from unemployed and desperate 6 months ago to financially stable with a career trajectory that actually excited me. It was my first major victory, and it felt like vindication. After the meeting ended and the hotel executives were being escorted out by our sales team, Roland Hayes asked if he could speak with me privately for a moment. We stepped into an empty office, and he closed the door. He told me that he had overheard some of the conversation about the hacking incident, that Tori had mentioned it briefly when they were rescheduling the original presentation. He wanted me to know that he recognized what I was dealing with, because he had lived through something similar. Roland grew up in foster care, bouncing between 7 different homes before aging out of the system at 18. He built his hotel empire through scholarships, student loans, working 3 jobs while going to school, and refusing to quit even when every obstacle seemed insurmountable. Along the way, people had tried to sabotage him, steal his ideas, undermine his success, because they couldn't stand to see someone from his background achieve what he had achieved. He looked me in the eye and said he saw something special in me, that I had the kind of fight that couldn't be taught or faked. Then he offered me something extraordinary. Roland told me that in addition to my work for his company, he wanted to hire me as a personal consultant for some of his private investments. He was expanding into boutique hotel properties and needed someone who understood modern marketing to help position these acquisitions. The work would be separate from my day job, maybe 10 hours a month, and he would pay me between $3,000 and $5,000 monthly, depending on the projects. More importantly, he wanted to mentor me, to help me build the kind of career and financial security that would make me untouchable. He also mentioned casually that if I ever needed legal assistance beyond what I could afford, his personal attorneys were at my disposal. He had heard enough to know I was dealing with family members who were trying to destroy me, and he didn't tolerate that kind of behavior. I left that conversation with a second powerful ally, someone who had resources and connections that could change the trajectory of my entire life. I suddenly had Tori protecting my career, and Roland opening doors I didn't even know existed. My family had tried to isolate me, but instead, I had built a team of people who genuinely wanted to see me succeed. Meanwhile, Sloane's Monaco trip was playing out exactly as anyone could have predicted. Her Instagram became a daily documentation of excess. Photos of yacht parties where champagne flowed like water, casino nights where she dropped thousands of dollars on roulette without blinking, shopping sprees through designer stores in Monte Carlo where she bought clothes she would wear once. She posted videos of herself laughing with people whose names she would forget the next day, living a fantasy life funded entirely by our parents' money. The $100,000 lasted exactly 14 days. When she returned home, her bags full of purchases she didn't need, she immediately started complaining about how expensive everything had been, how the trip had barely been enough to truly enjoy Monaco the way it deserved to be enjoyed. Within a week of returning, she was asking our parents for more money, claiming she needed another $20,000 to recover from the trip and get herself set up properly now that she was back. And they gave it to her. No questions asked. No lectures about financial responsibility. She moved back into their house, having never really moved out in the first place, with no job and no plans to find one. The entire time this was happening, I watched from a distance, posted nothing on social media, said nothing to mutual friends or family. I just focused on my work and let Sloane's behavior speak for itself. 6 months after I landed the hotel contract, my professional life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was sitting in my parents' living room watching Sloane get her Monaco money. The marketing campaign I designed exceeded every projection, generating a 23% increase in bookings for the hotel chain's flagship properties and creating social media engagement that caught the attention of industry publications. Marketing Weekly ran a feature article about innovative strategies in hospitality marketing, and my photo appeared alongside a detailed interview about the campaign. The article mentioned my age, my position, and quoted Roland Hayes calling me one of the brightest marketing minds he had worked with in 30 years. The publication had a circulation that reached most business professionals in the Northeast, which meant extended family members, old family friends, and basically everyone in my parents' social circle saw that article. Suddenly, relatives who had called me bitter and unstable 6 months ago were sending friend requests and congratulatory messages. I ignored every single one. My parents saw the article but said nothing to me directly. Sloane posted vague Instagram stories about fake people getting lucky breaks and how real talent doesn't need magazine recognition. What my family didn't know was that Graham had been preparing something much bigger than they could have anticipated. He filed a lawsuit against my parents for the full amount of my stolen inheritance plus 5 years of compound interest, which brought the total to $67,500. The legal papers were served at their house on a Tuesday morning while my mother was hosting her book club. The humiliation of having a process server show up in front of her friends was apparently devastating, based on the 12 furious voicemails she left on my phone that I never returned. My father called me a traitor. Said I was suing my own parents like some kind of monster, demanded to know how I could be so cruel and heartless. My mother's messages were equally venomous, asking how I could do this after everything they had done for me, claiming they had sacrificed so much to raise me and this was how I repaid them. The irony of their words didn't escape me. They had stolen $50,000 that my grandmother specifically left for me, given it to my sister, who wasted it on failed businesses. And somehow I was the villain for wanting my own money back. Sloane's response was predictably explosive and public. She posted on every social media platform about how her sister was suing their elderly parents, conveniently leaving out the part about the stolen inheritance and portraying my parents as struggling victims rather than the wealthy, comfortable people they actually were. She shared photos of them looking sad and tired, wrote long captions about how family betrayal was the worst pain imaginable, and tagged every extended family member she could think of. Within 48 hours, the family had launched a full excommunication campaign. My aunt sent me a message calling me cruel and saying I was no longer welcome at family events. My uncle posted publicly about the importance of respecting your elders and how suing your parents was a sign of moral bankruptcy. 3 cousins who I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt compelled to tell me I was a disgrace to the family name. The final blow came when my grandmother on my father's side, who was turning 90, explicitly uninvited me from her birthday celebration. The invitation had been sent weeks earlier, but now I received a formal email from my aunt, saying that given the current family situation, it would be best if I didn't attend. They were closing ranks, presenting a united front, trying to isolate me completely and make me feel like I was alone against the entire family. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't alone anymore, and their attempts to hurt me were just building my legal case stronger. But there was one more betrayal waiting that I genuinely didn't see coming. My father, Richard Bennett, owned a successful insurance brokerage that he had built over 30 years. His business partner, Thomas Whitmore, was a man I had known since childhood, someone who had always been kind to me at family gatherings and company parties. His daughter Melissa had gone to high school with me, and we had been friendly, if not close friends. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Thomas called me from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, he sounded concerned and sympathetic. He told me that he couldn't stand by and watch what was happening, that he thought my parents were wrong, and that he wanted to warn me about something. He said my father was planning some kind of retaliation, that he had overheard conversations about fighting the lawsuit aggressively and trying to countersue me for emotional distress. Thomas said he felt obligated to give me a heads up because what my parents were doing wasn't right, and he hoped I would keep this conversation confidential. I was so grateful for what seemed like support from someone in my parents' inner circle that I made a terrible mistake. I told Thomas details about my legal strategy, about the evidence Graham had collected, about the timeline for the case. I explained that we had documentation of everything, that the case was solid, and that I was confident we would win. Thomas listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and expressed admiration for how I was handling such a difficult situation. He told me to stay strong and promised to let me know if he heard anything else that might be useful. I thanked him profusely and hung up, feeling like maybe there were some decent people left who could see through my parents' manipulation. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. Graham called me on Friday afternoon with an edge in his voice I had never heard before. He asked if I had spoken to anyone about our legal strategy recently, anyone at all outside of him and Tori. When I mentioned Thomas, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Graham told me that my father's lawyer had just filed a motion that addressed every single point of our strategy, anticipated every argument we were planning to make, and included information that could only have come from someone who knew our detailed case preparation. Thomas had gone directly to my father with everything I told him. He had played the concerned ally perfectly, extracted information from me with practiced ease, and handed it all over to help my parents fight the lawsuit. Betrayal number 3 hit differently than the others because I had actually started to believe that someone from my parents' world might have a conscience. Graham assured me that this didn't destroy our case, that we still had overwhelming evidence, but it meant we had to adjust our strategy and assume that anything I said to anyone connected to my family would be reported back. Thomas' motivation became clear when Graham did some digging. Thomas and my father had a partnership agreement that included provisions about supporting each other in personal matters. More importantly, Thomas had his own children to think about, and maintaining a good relationship with his wealthy business partner was more valuable to him than helping his partner's daughter get justice. I learned once again that in my family's world, loyalty ran deep but only in directions that served people's interests. No one was going to risk their own position to help me, no matter how wrong my parents' actions were. The attacks didn't stop with legal maneuvering. 2 weeks after the lawsuit information was leaked, I applied for a mortgage to buy a small condo in a decent neighborhood. I had saved enough for a down payment, my credit had been good despite the financial struggles, and my new salary made me a solid candidate. The mortgage broker seemed optimistic after our first meeting, and I allowed myself to start imagining having a place that was truly mine, something my family couldn't touch or threaten. Then the application was denied. The broker called me sounding confused and asked if I had checked my credit report recently. I pulled it up immediately and felt my stomach drop. My credit score had plummeted by 200 points. The report showed 4 new credit cards opened in my name over the past 3 months, cards I had never applied for and certainly never used. These fraudulent accounts had racked up $30,000 in debt at high interest rates, all of it now showing as my responsibility. The charges were for luxury goods from stores I had never shopped at, restaurants I had never eaten at, purchases made at locations near Sloane's favorite shopping areas. This was attack number 7, and it was criminal in a way that even the computer hacking hadn't been. This was identity theft, a federal crime, with a paper trail that would be easy to trace once we started investigating. I filed a police report immediately, and Graham added identity theft to the growing list of legal issues surrounding my family. The credit card applications had been submitted online with forged copies of my signature and identification documents. Someone had gone to significant effort to steal my identity and destroy my financial credibility right when I was trying to make the biggest purchase of my life. The addresses associated with some of the cards traced back to a P.O. box that Sloane had rented 6 months earlier. The spending patterns matched her typical behavior perfectly. She had literally committed identity theft against her own sister, racking up debt that would have destroyed my credit for years if I hadn't caught it when I did. Graham worked with the credit bureaus to flag the accounts as fraudulent, but the process would take months to fully resolve, and my mortgage application was dead in the water for now. Graham scheduled a meeting at his office to show me everything we had collected over the past year. He spread documents across the conference table in organized stacks, each one representing a different attack or betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming. We had the paper trail showing my parents received my $50,000 inheritance and never gave it to me, complete with bank statements and the accountant's testimony. We had witness statements from the restaurant where they humiliated me and forced me to beg for money to pay my bill. We had phone records proving the call to my employer trying to sabotage my job, traced directly to Sloane's number. We had screenshots and archived versions of every social media post from the smear campaign, all time-stamped and documented. We had the email evidence of the landlord harassment with the traced IP address. We had the IT forensics report about the computer hacking, complete with the digital fingerprints leading to Sloane's boyfriend. We had the credit card applications with forged signatures and all the fraudulent charges. We had documentation of every attack, every betrayal, every attempt to destroy my life over the past 18 months. Graham looked at me across that table covered in evidence and told me I had enough to pursue criminal charges against Sloane for identity theft and conspiracy to commit computer crimes. We could also pursue a civil case for damages beyond just the stolen inheritance. The case against my parents for the trust fund theft was solid, backed by documentation that would be impossible for them to refute. We could destroy them legally, pursue maximum penalties, make sure Sloane faced jail time and my parents faced both financial consequences and public humiliation. The question was how far I wanted to go. Did I want complete legal victory and revenge, or did I want to settle this in a way that got me my money back without dragging everyone through the courts for years? Graham made it clear he would support whatever decision I made, but I needed to think carefully about what outcome would actually give me peace. I sat there looking at the mountain of evidence that represented the worst 18 months of my life, and I realized I needed time to decide. I had the power now, which was something I never thought I would have. The question was how I wanted to use it. 5 years passed between that day in my parents' living room when they gave Sloane $100,000 for Monaco, and the moment I walked out of the courthouse with Graham by my side, holding a judgment in my favor. I was 33 years old now, and my life looked nothing like what my family had predicted for me when they dismissed me as worthless and unremarkable. I held the title of Director of Marketing for Roland Hayes' expanding hotel empire, overseeing campaigns across 15 properties in 3 countries. My salary was $185,000 plus performance bonuses that usually added another $30,000 to $40,000 annually. I owned a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Hartford with a view of the city skyline. My investment accounts held over $200,000. Most importantly, I was married to Graham Pierce, the lawyer who had started as my advocate and became the love of my life. We were expecting our first child, a daughter due in 3 months. Everything my parents said I would never achieve, every success they claimed I wasn't capable of, I had accomplished on my own terms with people who actually believed in me. The lawsuit concluded after 18 months of legal proceedings. The judge reviewed all the evidence Graham presented, including the documentation from the accountant, the bank statements showing my parents received my inheritance, and their own admission that they had given the money to Sloane without my knowledge or consent. The ruling was unequivocal. My parents were ordered to pay me $67,500, which included the original $50,000 inheritance, plus 5 years of compound interest calculated at the rate my grandmother's trust had specified. Additionally, they were ordered to pay my legal fees, which amounted to $15,000 that Graham had carefully documented. The total judgment was $82,500. The judge's statement was scathing. She said the court found the defendant's behavior reprehensible, that stealing from your own child and giving that money to another child showed a level of favoritism and cruelty that violated both legal and moral obligations. The words from the bench felt like vindication, like someone in authority finally saw what my family had done to me and called it what it was. The criminal case against Sloane proceeded separately. She was charged with identity theft and conspiracy to commit computer crimes. The evidence was too strong for her to fight, and her lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution for the fraudulent charges plus damages. Her boyfriend received a similar sentence for the computer hacking. Sloane would have a criminal record now, which would follow her for the rest of her life, affecting her ability to get jobs, rent apartments, and establish credit. My parents' reputation in their community was destroyed. The local newspaper covered the lawsuit because it involved a prominent business owner, and the case details were sensational enough to attract readers. Their friends at the country club distanced themselves. People who had known them for decades looked at them differently after learning they had stolen their own daughter's inheritance. The consequences rippled through every aspect of their lives, and I felt no sympathy whatsoever. After the court session ended, I walked out of the courthouse with Graham holding my hand and Tori walking beside us. I was ready to go home and celebrate this victory quietly with the people who mattered. But my parents were waiting in the parking lot, standing beside their car like they had been there for hours. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked older than I had ever seen him. They approached slowly, and I stopped walking, standing my ground while Graham tensed beside me. My mother spoke first, her voice breaking as she asked how I could do this to them, how I could put my own parents through such a humiliating public ordeal. My father added that they were my parents, that family doesn't sue family, that there had to be another way to resolve this without destroying their reputation and financial stability. I looked at these two people who had given life to me but had spent years making me feel worthless, and I realized I felt nothing but indifference. I told them they stopped being my parents the day they stole from me, the day they chose Sloane over me so completely that they saw nothing wrong with taking my inheritance and giving it to her. I reminded them that they gave her $100,000 for a vacation while refusing to lend me $5,000 when I was unemployed and struggling. I pointed out that they called me worthless, plain, jealous, bitter, and every other cruel thing they could think of while praising Sloane for doing absolutely nothing with her life. I told them they had helped her sabotage my career, my housing, my reputation, and my future at every possible opportunity. I explained that I didn't destroy this family because there was nothing left to destroy. They had done that years ago when they made it clear that only one of their daughters mattered to them. Their choice, their cruelty, their theft had created this situation, and the court simply held them accountable for their actions. My voice was calm and steady, and I felt powerful in a way I had never experienced before. Sloane appeared from somewhere behind their car, screaming that I was insane, that I was going to jail for this, that I had destroyed the family over money. I looked at my sister, this person who had dedicated 18 months of her life to trying to ruin mine, and I smiled. I told her that she was the one going to jail, or at least probation, for identity theft. I was going home to my husband and my successful career and my life that I built without any help from people who were supposed to love me. My father tried a different approach, his voice desperate as he said they could fix this, they could pay me back and we could work on our relationship and be a family again. I told him I didn't want a relationship with them anymore. That ship had sailed long ago. I wanted what they stole from me, and the court had agreed that I deserved it. As for being a family, they had made it clear that I was never truly part of theirs, so I had built my own with people who actually valued me. I turned and walked toward my car without looking back, even as my parents called after me, pleading and angry in equal measure. Graham opened the passenger door for me. Tori gave me a fierce hug, and we drove away from that courthouse and those people who would never have power over me again. 1 month after the court judgment, I was sitting in my condo nursery watching Graham paint the walls a soft lavender while Tori arranged baby clothes she had bought as gifts. Roland had sent a case of non-alcoholic champagne to celebrate both the legal victory and the upcoming baby, along with a handwritten note saying he was proud of me. The check from my parents had cleared, all $82,500 now sitting in my bank account. I donated $15,000 to a nonprofit that helped young women escape toxic families and rebuild their lives. The rest I put toward paying off the last of my old debts and starting a college fund for my daughter. As I sat there, surrounded by people who loved me authentically, I realized the money had never been the real point. The victory wasn't about the dollars in my account. The victory was proving them wrong about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The victory was standing up for myself when everyone told me to be quiet and accept mistreatment because they were family. The victory was building a life they said I didn't deserve and doing it without their approval or support. I learned lessons in those 5 years that changed me fundamentally as a person. I learned that toxic family members must be cut off completely, no matter how painful that process is, because keeping them in your life only gives them more opportunities to hurt you. I learned that success really is the best response to people who doubt you, not because you need to prove anything to them, but because living well shows you that their opinions were always worthless. I learned to document everything when people attack you, because evidence is power in a world where manipulative people can twist any narrative. I learned that finding allies who see your worth is more important than maintaining relationships with people who never valued you in the first place. I learned that patience and strategy will always beat emotional reactions when you're fighting people who want you to lose control. I learned that you don't owe loyalty to people who harm you repeatedly, that blood relation doesn't create obligation when that relationship is abusive. Most importantly, I learned that family isn't about biology or shared last names. It's about love and respect, and people who show up for you when life gets hard. My new family consisted of Graham, who would become my husband and father of my child, Tori, who mentored me and believed in me when I had nothing, Roland, who opened doors and gave me opportunities I never could have found alone, and real friends like Becca, who wired me money without questions when I needed help. My parents and Sloane were strangers now, people I once knew but no longer had any connection to. I blocked them on every platform, changed my phone number, and made it clear to mutual acquaintances that I had no interest in updates about their lives. The peace that came from that separation was profound. I no longer woke up anxious about what attack might come next. I no longer questioned my worth or wondered if I was the problem. I built a life filled with people who celebrated my successes instead of trying to sabotage them, and that made all the difference. The final truth I understood was simple but powerful. 5 years ago, they gave Sloane Monaco and gave me nothing. Today, I had everything that truly mattered, and they had nothing but regret for the daughter they lost because they were too blind to see her value. I didn't just survive them. I won. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, I gave birth to Victoria Rose Pierce, named after Tori Walsh, who had saved me when I was at my lowest point. My parents tried to visit the hospital, showing up uninvited and demanding to see their grandchild. Hospital security removed them at my request, and I filed a formal no-contact order that same week. Sloane was finishing her probation and working a minimum-wage retail job to pay her restitution, living in a studio apartment because she could no longer afford anything else, and my parents had finally cut off her unlimited funding. My parents had sold their vacation home in Cape Cod to cover the legal judgment and their own attorney fees. The extended family members who had sided with them so enthusiastically were now trying to reconnect with me, sending messages about how they hadn't known the full story and hoped we could move past the unpleasantness. I responded politely but distantly, telling them I was busy building my real family and had no space in my life for people who had shown me exactly where their loyalties lay when it mattered. The final image I want to leave you with is this: me holding my daughter Victoria in the nursery Graham painted, surrounded by Tori and Roland and real friends who flew in to meet the baby, people who chose to love me and support me without conditions. The family I was born into rejected me, stole from me, and tried to destroy me at every opportunity. The family I built chose me, fought for me, and celebrated every victory alongside me. That's the lesson I learned from those 5 brutal years. You can't choose the family you're born into, but you can absolutely choose the family you build. And sometimes, the family you build becomes the only family that matters. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect yourself? Have you experienced that moment when you realized you deserved better than what people were giving you? Drop your story in the comments below, because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through something like this. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you want more real stories about overcoming family drama and building the life you deserve. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself over family loyalty when that family is destroying you. Your story matters, your healing matters, and you're not alone in this fight. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. I hope my story gives you courage if you're facing something similar. Remember, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so good that the people who doubted you become irrelevant. Take care of yourselves out there, choose people who choose you back, and never let anyone make you feel worthless just because they can't see your value. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for the life you deserve.